I would say a lot of what leaders reward is not highly conscious. And so how do you look at, what am I rewarding? What do I acknowledge? What do I celebrate? What do I notice? What do I talk about when, behind people's backs? What are you really focused on?
All right, good morning. Looking forward to spending time today with Lidia Young, who has an interesting journey, and it's helped her really shape her unique vision of communications and leadership and the things she teaches and coaches as she works with folks. And excited to hear more about that, Lydia. So why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your unique journey to the United States and some of the things you learned along the way.
Wow, that's a rather large bucket to start with. So my parents had very challenging and interesting lives. My mother grew up in the time of Stalin in the then Soviet Ukraine. And when she was 10 years old, she witnessed her whole family perish in a famine, and she was the sole survivor of a famine. And if you know anything about history of that uh, geographic area, um, Germany invaded the Soviet Ukraine and took all of the young people as slave labor. So she had an intense journey of losing her entire family, and then as a teenager being taken to a work camp in Germany. Anyway, after the war, um, you could either get in line to go back home, wherever home was out of those work camps, or you could get in a line and go anywhere. She got in a line that said anywhere because she really had no reason to go back. There was nobody left. So she ended up, excuse me, in England, where my dad, who was also Ukrainian, happened to end up. And in those days, pre-internet, um, you can imagine after the war, people are trying to find each other. So people would take out like an ad, a personal ad to say, do you know any Powells in the whatever area? Or do like I'm a Kaufman in the peculiar area. Do you know do you have any information about other people that are in my family? So my dad's name was Mikhailo Kravchenko, and Kravchenko is like Smith. So my mother said, oh yeah, I know some Kravchenkos. So she contacted him and they met and got together. And huge part of it too is they had the language in common and the culture in common. Really, really difficult to explain those things to people that really haven't experienced it. So they got together. My brother and I were born in England. They left when I was 11 months old because had I been a year old, they would have needed to buy me a ticket and they didn't have the money. So they left with two babies, got on a very slow boat and got literally as far as they could go. They got to Montreal with two babies and $6. And that's where they started life in the new world. So then we were in Montreal for 10 years waiting for a sponsor to the United States because both of my parents were uneducated. They weren't exactly desirable people that the US was dying to admit. So they had to have a sponsor to enable them to immigrate to the US. And we ended up in Rochester, New York, and I got there when I was about 10 years old or so. Okay, Randy, help me. We could, there's so much to the story. We don't want to get lost.
No, that's awesome. But I think, when you and I spoke, there are lessons you took from their journey that shaped some of your own approach to communications and teamwork and community. And, there was a certain amount of, perseverance and grit and go it aloneness that they had to have to make it through those trying times. And so you took some good from that as well. And so, yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
talk about some of the lessons you've learned that help shape how you go build, a team and a sense of community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that they were passionate about was education. And one of the things that was a mantra all of my siblings and my growing up was, they can't take what's in your head. They can take your stuff. You could, my mom, when she was a child in the Soviet Ukraine, I mean, got evicted off their farm by the communist regime. So it was like the more education you have, the more you know, the more you can be okay in the world. So it made me passionate about learning. I'm a consummate learner. I read all the time. I'm taking classes all the time. So that lesson got very well instilled in me. Another thing that my background really inspired was, so before I became a business coach or an executive coach, um, I well, I am a therapist, because understanding the depth of people's journeys and the uniqueness of what makes people able or unable to move in a particular way or to communicate in a particular way is really critical to somebody being highly effective. And so my clinical experience gave me that sense of, win-win, that as a therapist, when you're working with a family, I mean, everybody's valuable, and you're trying to make everybody have a voice and be preserved and be able to really feel safe to grow. So that's very much a part of how I approach business and business leaders and leadership. Um, how can you inspire a culture where people are really welcome to share their opinions and their views and genuinely be heard? And I think it's interesting now, the research shows that the number one, without exception, thing that is needed on a team in order for it to be, especially successful or effective, is psychological safety. And that is a very deep subject. Psychological safety is a really, really big deal. So imagine being on a team where you risk asking a stupid question, or you risk saying, hey, I don't know anything about that. Or where you risk saying, wow, yeah, we're moving in this direction, and it's in the area of my greatest weaknesses. So psychological safety, imagine if leaders only focused on that. And it doesn't mean everybody gets a vote. Psychological safety is not necessarily about agreement or everybody, being kumbaya. It is about a level of integrity and honesty and authenticity where people can genuinely speak their mind, so that better decisions can be made. Because in every organization and on every team, there's an informal culture. And the informal culture is the unspoken culture. It's not the values on the wall. It's not the mission vision. It's what's really true, what's really possible, what's really happening, including, um, is it okay to ask questions? Is it okay to give feedback? Is it okay to disagree with the direction of the leader? And a lot of times the answer in organizations is no, it's not safe. And you're wise to sort of keep your head down and fly under the radar, because it's really not a safe thing to be doing. So in order for a leader to inspire psychological safety, they also have to have a lot of self-awareness, because you've got to be able to tolerate dissent and tolerate somebody challenging you or saying, gee, I really see this completely differently. So I think that was a huge piece of my therapeutic training. And also, witnessing in my family the ways in which people's histories impact them. So for instance, my dad, who really did a very brave thing, bringing his family to the new world and not having money, not having a job when he got here, and really risking everything to give his family a chance. He also was a very compromised human being. And there was a point at which, once he got his family to the new world, he just sort of stopped growing, stopped, like he just kind of had done his thing. And now there was no more gas left in the tank, and he was just going to like coast at a pretty low level the rest of his life. So just witnessing the choices that people make, or the way that in which people challenge themselves to grow, and in which ways people really shrink from growth, or are fearful of change, or are fearful of actually sometimes it's fear of even the vulnerability of really great stuff. Because the paradox of life is that it takes vulnerability to also feel the good stuff, and to open up to joy, and to celebration and love, and enjoying the success that your team has created, or enjoying your child or your grandchild. It takes vulnerability to be open-hearted. So it's all of this leadership stuff is deep, amazing, interesting, phenomenal stuff. And I'm a avid reader of leadership books, and I love them all. But the $1,000,000 question is, how do you make it actionable? How do you integrate it into who you are? And I think that's where I see the biggest gaps. Is it's easy to agree with good ideas. I think everybody easily agrees with good ideas, and they don't necessarily have the capacity or the courage to really deeply embody those ideas, so that it becomes who they are, not just what they think.
You hit on something really interesting there a minute ago around toxic cultures, I call them, but where everybody in the room knows something is a bad idea, and they walk out and tell each other out in the hallway, but nobody can say it in the room. But I've never worked with any toxic leader who thought they were the toxic leader. They always think, oh, I can take criticism, I can take feedback. People are welcome to say what they want, and nobody in the room believes that. How do you help leaders create a better self-awareness, or to know that they haven't created a good? I loved it when the people who work with me tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, because one, they're usually right, and two, I always felt like that was pretty good that they didn't mind telling me. And so, but how do you help people get to that point?
Slowly and carefully, right? Because I think you are absolutely correct that when there is a toxic culture, the leader is not self-aware, or they have an agenda of significance where it's got to be their way. They need to feel important. And there's nothing wrong with needing to feel important. It just, what are you feeling important about? What is it that you're really feeling pride in? But it's a delicate journey. Like I have a meeting actually tomorrow with a leader who, in a meeting where I just recently was with him and a subordinate, that he did not let that subordinate finish a sentence. And I tried a couple of times in the meeting to say, hey, let so-and-so finish their thought. And after about the third time, it was clear he was pissed off, like, shut up, like, stop. And I thought, okay, good, I'll do that. But I want to have a private meeting with him one-on-one, because he may not be aware that he doesn't let people finish what they're saying. And so I'm going to share that feedback, and then we'll see what happens with that. It'll either be I'll try harder, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you're fired.
I think Steve has a question for you.
Yeah.
Well, Lidia, I love who you are and everything that you do. I really do want to get back together with you. But just to help refresh my memory and expand on some of the things you talked about. You have a preference between individual versus group consulting? And secondly, is there a process? When you talk about actionable, what's the process that you try to take an individual through or a group through to improve the dynamics and the communication?
So individual or group, I don't know. I mean, I love them both. I work with family business, which is gnarly and interesting because there's so much at stake. But I think like when you're working with a leader and a team, it's a very different outcome if you can watch them with their team and help to facilitate that team. So I'm currently working with a couple that own a large business, and I work with them one-on-one, and it's an entirely different thing working with them than together. But it's the joint meeting that is the most traction, because they can complain about each other in the individual meeting, but in the joint meeting, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and they really have to really resolve those issues. So Steve, is there a process? Not really. I mean, yes. So yes, there's a process, but it's very organic. I don't think you can push people faster than they can go. So you can, I have a very, I would say, I have a process, but it really is also open to what are the capacities of the people, so that you don't get ahead of them, so that you are constantly following them and being with them rather than being ahead of them or being behind them. And that takes, sensitivity to what's the toleration right now and what are they learning right now, or are they just agreeing with the ideas and nodding their heads and saying, great idea, but not much more is filtering into how they're experiencing themselves or what they're doing in terms of their leadership. So
what are the road markers along the way that tell you you're making progress?
the level of dialogue in the room. So the level of even the quiet people chiming in, speaking up, wanting to be a part of the conversation. So that tells you something. So if I'm working with a team and it's mostly the leader talking, does not bode well for what the culture's like in that group. A level of, excitement where people are, there's a level of passion and excitement that they're exhibiting, they're interested in being there. I mean, when I'm in a when I'm in a meeting where people look like they're just phoning it in, literally, I mean, they're just there because they're supposed to be there. I mean, you can feel that in a room. You can feel exactly, it's lifeless. I mean, people are just kind of bumps on the log, and they're maybe taking a note or two, but there's not much passion or engagement. So I would say that the absolutely a litmus test would be the level of and the quality of the discussion. Are they really talking about something, what's really going on in the room?
If you have questions, type it in the chat and we'll get you unmuted. You talked a little bit about fear a minute ago, and particularly that fear of doing something great, which I think is real. I think people struggle with putting themselves out there and being a bit adventurous. What does that look like to you, and how do you help people realize that and navigate that?
Part of the journey with that is helping people to remember hard or scary things they've done in the past to remind them that they've got history and muscles that they may have forgotten about, or that they may not have honored more as deeply as they should. And helping people remember how good it feels when you take a step, when you take even a small step in the direction of something that you want or something that you care about, helping them remember what that feels like. Because really, truly, I mean, all of life is about feeling, right? I mean, we're either feeling engaged and alive, or we're not, or we're feeling really checked out or exhausted, or something that's not very inspiring. And I think, I think once people recognize that they have some choice, and that they can take even a small step in the direction of where they want to go, that it helps them uh, to rethink that even a small step is a wonderful plan versus no steps until they can get to perfection or launch some big massive thing, to help them to really chunk it down in a way that enables them to begin to move forward.
How much of that is controlled somewhat by the people we surround ourselves with, and that they might laugh at us, they might hold us back, they might not believe in us, so we continue to surround ourselves with people that won't let us be what we could be?
I would say expand your circle. If that's true in your life, expand your circle and find new, interesting, excited people that are enjoying growing. I mean, I think growth is really the opportunity. If people aren't growing, they're dying. And so they may look like they, on the surface are doing well, but if they're not growing, it's not a great life. So if your life is just not packed full of interesting people that are growing, I would say you have some opportunity to meet some new folks.
Let's go to Libby.
Hi, good morning. I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I'm so fascinated. I know you were a year old when you got to Canada, but that 10-year, what I would think of as a wait period. And again, I know you were really young, but I always wonder, like people that are on a list waiting, whether to get into the US or whatever, was that pervasive in your family? Like, did your parents talk about it all the time? Were you widely aware that you were kind of in this waiting period? And how do you think that impacted you?
I would say very widely aware. But in Montreal, we lived in an immigrant ghetto where there were people from everywhere. I mean, in our tenement building, there were people from Jamaica and Greece and China. So it was this incredible. Actually, Canada was wonderful because I didn't feel like a weird kid. It was when I got to the US that I felt like I was an unusual and strange little creature. Because in Canada, everybody was from someplace else where we lived. But when I got to the US, my mom had dressed me in my Canadian school uniform to go to the first day of class. And I had long braids, and all the other little girls had pixie haircuts, little short, cute haircuts. And because the Canadian schools were ahead, I skipped a grade within 2 days. And so kids thought I was ugly and weird. And who the hell are you that you think you can skip a grade? And it was like, oh my God, it's not safe to be here. So there was a tremendous learning in that journey as well, which has also been exceedingly helpful in my coaching career. Because from that point when I was 10 until I got to about college, man, I did not speak up in school. I might read all the books, do the assignments, maybe do extra reading, but I was not going to be a target ever. So I'm really good at spotting people that are hiding out, and in the best possible way, that I can see over their wall, because I constructed my wall so well as a kid that it's just part of my DNA now. But yeah, I think we were very lucky to get to the US. I'm really grateful to the Ukrainian church that sponsored us, because what the deal with that church was is that they were guaranteeing that we would not be a drain on society, so that if my parents elected not to work, that they would sort of pay our way. But of course my parents did work and that didn't happen. But we were very aware of how fortunate we were always.
That's fantastic. I mean, what a way to take what seems like adversity and flip it around.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, everybody has that opportunity to wake up to their life, whether there's, I mean, my life has a lot of dramatic twists and turns to it, but everybody has the opportunity to much more deeply and consciously look at what did they learn from their life, what have they gained, what and their particular journey, what gifts did that really inspire in them, because they're there and you may not value them enough, you may not consciously use them enough, but I think that that's an opportunity for everybody.
Thank you.
Let's go to Kirsten.
Hi. So how do you get that culture of rich engagement if people just don't seem interested? You talked about those meetings where it's just super quiet because nobody is engaged. They're mentally, putting together their grocery list or writing their menu or figuring out what it is that they have to do an hour from now, instead of being participant in what's happening. Are there questions that you ask to get things moving? Because you have bobbleheads, instead of active participants, and then you walk away from that meeting and it's like, oh, everything's going great. Nobody had any problems. Nobody had any concerns. And yet, that there has to be something. So how do you get past that and get over that hurdle?
Right. The truth is everybody's loaded with opinions. We all have mega opinions about everything. So for people to not have any thoughts about what's going on at work, just that's a huge indicator there's lots going on. What I would do, Kirsten, is I would ask people, like at the beginning of the meeting, to just say, what would make this a meaningful use of your time? Just an open-ended question, and then see what comes back, and are you the leader of that group, Kirsten? I mean, I'm trying to see how much authority you have there. You are. Okay. So, let them know that you want to make it meaningful and a good use of their time, but throw some accountability onto them to help you design it, help you create it, because it's their meeting. It's actually their meeting. And what do they want to get from it? And I think once you get some buy-in from there, you can then help them see how you are responding to those things that are important to them. And if you get nothing, you can also say, wow, how is this possible? And wow, what a lose-lose situation. I can't help you get what you want, and I have no idea how to make this better. So, help them to see the stuckness and invite their help to get it unstuck.
Cameron, are you still there? We can skip him and go.
I am.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
You want me to read my question?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. So I was just interested on your thoughts and experience with the concept of servant leadership and how that approach or practice correlates with or assuming it does, with the correlation and reduction of a toxic work environment.
Oh, absolutely. I think if somebody's doing servant leadership, it would absolutely reduce, if not eradicate, a toxic culture. And the question that I would ask you is, how do you know if you're doing servant leadership or not? What kind of feedback are you getting from your people? Because, if servant leadership's just a moniker, just a bucket or a title or it's kind of like mission vision, which may not mean much once it's on the wall, but in what ways in your organization is servant leadership happening, and how do you know that that's true? So I would be asking a whole lot more questions rather than assuming that, well, it's working or because it's our agreement. I mean, it would be a interesting journey to just identify more, because if it is indeed happening, that's a lot to celebrate and a lot to enjoy and to help your people feel great about. But I would ask a lot of questions as to, in what ways are we embodying this and how do we see this in action?
Okay.
Let's go to Mike.
Lydia, great to see you again. I'll try to be as concise as possible. As I've written up my opinion, and I've, seen other people write articles, emotionalism versus rationalism. And we seem to live in this world of emotionalism. My thoughts, or at least what I've run into, how do you, on one hand, make people feel valued and heard by listening to what it is that they're saying? Yet at the same time, I'll say not conflating someone's ill-informed opinion with true expertise, meaning, I'm very analytical. So typically I'll be like, all right, well, tell me why you feel that way, or tell me why you think we should do this, or why this course of action is preferred. And a lot of times what I'll get is, well, I just feel it. And I'm kind of a hard case in that I'm like, if you don't do your homework and you can't lay out a case for me as to why it is you think this is the preferred course of action, I'm not really going to lend it much credence. This whole, I just feel it in my heart, doesn't really work well with me. Yeah. But at the same time, what in my, I'll say, journey as a leader, especially coming out of the military now, where it's less hard and a little bit more, I'll say, fuzzy. Still wanting to convey that, your opinion matters, I care. But at the same time, I think, and then I'll be quiet, is I think people feel that, well, my opinion is valuable because it's my opinion. I don't have to do my homework. I don't have to have facts, and I don't have to have expertise, and you should still listen to me. And I tend to push back on that. But how do you do so in a manner that doesn't just come across as dismissive of somebody's inputs?
Right. I think it's then again about relationship, right? So Mike, help them to see how it's hard for you. So you have the incredible opportunity then for them to say, yeah, you've got your opinion, but we are at an impasse because I need facts. And I'd love to consider more of what it is you think or feel. And I'd love for you to do a little more research, do your homework, come get back to me, because we are at a point in this conversation where I can't really move forward with you because I need a little bit more. So invite them to go back and flesh it out with some facts. And help them to see that you're interested, you want to know, you want there to be a bridge, but they need to help create one.
No, that's great. And I'm not going to say, oh, put the onus on them, but there is a degree of that, like, hey, I'm going to need you to do your work too.
Yeah.
And then if they're willing to do that, then there you go. If they're not willing to do that, then as you point out, hey, we're at an impasse and I can't help you.
And you can be at an impasse with great kindness. And you can say goodbye to somebody with great kindness. It's not about, you don't ever have to be, a jerk to disagree or to part ways with someone.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Mike, you said this is a warm, fuzzy world that we're in, something like that.
Comparatively. From the world that I'm used to.
So go back to Steve.
Lydia, in the world of business ownership, so business owners are leaders, and they're always connecting dots back to tangible things. What's on the income statement, cash flow, balance sheet. So there are these tools that business owners use, like traction, Gino Wickman's book or approach, and also, and so that creates a language, actually. It's a meeting management and language kind of thing. Open book management is connecting. I'm a big believer everything we do or don't do, say or don't say, has an impact on the culture and the numbers. And open book management has the leader communicate and educate everyone in the business on how their behavior and performance moves numbers. So there are tangible things, but trying to get Grant Gooding into the conversation, leaders also try to get their staff to think outside the box. So I'm just wondering, do you, in your consulting, use those tools to connect all those dots to tangible things and intangible things?
Not profoundly like you're talking about. I mean, a lot of times leaders have already read those books, and I think for them it's about creating a way for their teams to have those conversations, like what would enable them to feel more successful, more productive, and absolutely having clarity about, what do you track and how do people know they're successful? I mean, in a lot of organizations, they have no clue what they're really being judged on and what is being measured, even if it's an informal measurement. So having great clarity about what it is that you are really looking for in terms of deliverables from them, so that they can know, hey, we're on track, or I'm on track. One of the things that research is showing now too is that when teams enjoy working together, they are less likely to leave an organization. So if you've got a team that's really clicking, and it doesn't, and it doesn't mean that they hang out after work or that there's happy hour, it's none of that. But if a team has psychological safety and they're really, really enjoying the journey together, their results are going to outshine other teams that maybe have great metrics, there's a great tracking system, but they're not that inspired to produce those results. So really look at, what would enable those, what's the configuration of the team, and how do you help them to connect at a deep level so that they can really enjoy the work. I'm really collaborative, and I love doing things with other people, much more so than doing things on my own. I traveled to France with a group of friends a couple of years ago, and there are some people that now, I mean, I would enjoy going to the gas station with to get a Slurpee, and other people that I never want to go anywhere with ever again because they were so awful in terms of being horrible travelers, right? So looking at what are the dynamics on the team, and what can you as the owner leader help provide that team to get the barriers out of the way, or if they're not getting along well, how do you facilitate a process that enables those conflicts to be resolved so that they can enjoy the work and enjoy the collaboration, so that they can get the results that you're really after. So Steve, it's a both and.
Well, now expand a little bit on getting the team to think outside the box. Again, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you may not get a competitive advantage.
Well, are they really allowed to think outside the box? So let's say they have 5 failed ideas before the 6th or the 10th idea hits. And at idea 5, the business owner is unhappy, right? I mean, so you've also got to look at what is the container that you have, like in your organization. Like, are they then dinged for the failures, and are they dinged for the bad ideas? Because they're going to have some bad ones if they are thinking out of the box. So is the invitation think out of the box, or think out of the box only if it's an idea I'm going to like that's going to be successful?
One more.
Okay.
So the last 12 months have exposed social unrest issues,
Yes.
racial issues, and we've had women in business issues going on for many years, as well as race issues. How do you create an environment to address those very, political, religious, social issues and move forward as a team?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, first of all, to have empathy and to acknowledge that we have a lot of social issues that are important in this country right now, and to also acknowledge, particularly, that you may not really understand what a particular group is going through, but there are some really basic needs that everybody has that I would imagine, and I would hope that everybody can agree to, that human dignity is important for all people. And what are we doing in our workplaces and in our cultures to inspire and allow people a dignified life and to be valued, right? And in what ways are you creating a space for people to share their journey or their experience, so that you can have a greater understanding of what they've experienced and what's important to them? I think it's really tragic that we can marginalize whole classes of people, or whole anythings of people. And just being an immigrant kid, I could really sense, sometimes people don't love differences. And even though differences are what make our culture interesting and rich, differences, we don't always welcome differences. So, I would encourage people to begin to look at what is their willingness to really expand their view of what they want to create in their business or in their neighborhood or in their church. And how do you welcome diversity, and how do you get to know people that are different than you are? I've done some work with some organizations on that have had transgender employees. And how does that employee find it honorable to stay at a company where they are making this major transition? So there's a lot that's required on both sides in order for that experience to go well. So, being willing to ask questions, being willing to be vulnerable yourself about, wow, I don't know much about this issue or this topic, but I would like to. When I was right out of grad school, I was a counselor, I was a therapist, and it was the early 90s, and there was a need for a support group for people that were HIV positive. And so I volunteered to, along with a friend from grad school, to facilitate this group. Excuse me. And they happened to be all gay men. And the very first night, the first comment was, well, who the hell are you? You're heterosexual and you look like you're from the junior league. And I thought, yes, of course, absolutely, that's true. Yes. And I was able to say yes. And I don't know about your lives and your journey. And I want to know, how can I be of service? And I said, and you can fire me anytime. And we met every week for 8 years. So it's a matter of openness and being willing, a genuine, so it cannot be BS. It can't be fake. I mean, it's got to be a genuine and authentic willingness to learn and to understand, so that you can be on the journey with people that may be very different than you are.
Lydia, it's easy to convince people to make change when the dumpster's on fire or the ship's sinking. But one of the big challenges, and I know folks on here, some folks particularly deal with that, is how do you motivate and inspire people to change when things are going really well? And you've got this track record and this history, and we've always done things great, but you need to make change and stay ahead anyways. How do you create that culture of influence that helps create that mandate for change when maybe it isn't obvious yet?
Well, I think as a leader, you get to go first and you get to share your passion and excitement. I think people are very easily influenced and want to kind of hook their wagon to your star if you're having a great time. And I mean, it's amazing to me that sometimes people make leadership look like this horrible drudge. I mean, it looks like, oh, why would you want to be a leader? It looks so painful. So as a leader, are you inspiring people with your genuine passion? And so if you're seeing a what's next, how well are you communicating that vision so that they can get excited about it too? So think about the difference between, we have to be ahead of the curve, we have to be like ahead of the next two things, versus this open curiosity about what's next and where are we going and won't it be fun, and can't wait to do this with all of you, whoever your team is. I mean, and what is the nature of your inspirational leadership? Is it because there's fear, like if we don't get ahead and if we don't have that next new idea, we're toast? Or is it from a true place of expansion and inspiration and joy? So I think there's a lot of self-reflection leaders need to do if they're not getting that from their people.
How do you help leaders develop the ability to influence? If you look that we've migrated away from 70s or 80s type hierarchical organizations of command and control. And so it's just do this or I'll fire you, do this or I'll write you up. In flatter organizations, a lot of the people that you need to perform don't even report to you. How do leaders develop that culture of influence more than the culture of command and control?
I think by celebrating the influences of others. So if your meetings are about, hey, let's talk about, or having those subordinates say, this is how I was influenced by whomever in a flat organization, and it enabled me to, I mean, what are meetings about? What is really highlighted? What's celebrated? What's important? I mean, we talk about what's important in meetings. If there's no reflection on how did we infuse the organization with more creativity, innovation, courage, responsibility, etc., you're going to miss out on, excuse me, a lot of fuel that could naturally be there. And I think when it's a culture of where people are genuinely recognized and that becomes okay, or the goal, that it becomes a culture then of inspiring others to share their good ideas, to be willing to be influential. It's all about the leadership and what they really reward. I would say a lot of what leaders reward is not highly conscious. And so how do you look at, what am I rewarding? What do I acknowledge? What do I celebrate? What do I notice? What do I talk about when, behind people's backs? What are you really focused on? Yeah. So, I work with some wonderful, I work with a concrete business that I love these guys. They are like salt of the earth. Not, like talking about Mike Kenny's comment. These are like rational, salt of the earth. There's not a lot of big, fluffy, warm, fuzzy. And it took a while to get them to be willing to talk about what was great, or who was great, or what made a job great. Because it's kind of like, it's just the facts, ma'am, and like, let's go on to the next thing, right? And it took them some time and a lot of harping from me that it didn't negate the goals or the next thing if you took a little bit of time to be willing to acknowledge even these really humble guys, for them to be able to voice what they did really well. So I think it's a practice, and I think that what I'm enabling them to do is to expand what they believe the culture could or should be in order to get results. So yeah, what do you talk about as a leader? What do you talk about with your friends about your organization or your people? That will tell you something about what you really value, or where you're focused.
Yeah, Steve and I have a conversation tomorrow with one of his groups, and it's about leadership. And the direction we're taking is that, we're not going to try and coach you to be a better leader after several decades, in some cases, of being a leader, but what are you doing to develop other leaders? And that idea that perhaps our role as leaders is to create a legacy, creating other leaders. What are your thoughts on that, of the role of leaders in creating other leaders, and how should we be doing that?
Well, that is a very delicate subject, because people could intellectually agree that developing other leaders is important, and it is. Are the leaders that are the founders, do they have a role in the future? Where are they headed? I think if they don't have a place that they're headed, that they're excited about, it's going to be a lot harder for them to give up power and control to younger or subordinates, because it's their way of being significant in the world, which is wonderful, which is not bad. They have to find other ways of feeling that level of significance so that they can then have the capacity to allow others to step into those roles in more profound ways. So it's a very, very, very deep question. What do they need to feel? What do they need to feel empowered to give up? And what's next for them? If there's not a what's next, they're going to have a really hard time giving up power and control.
That's an interesting perspective on that I hadn't thought about.
Because everybody agrees with, yeah, got to train the new, but I will tell you, with some of the leaders that I'm working with that are close to retirement, whew, they are saying that they're developing the next level leaders, and man, they're hanging on with their teeth and their nails, just like they're not giving up control. Or they'll say, yeah, I'll just work part-time, meaning, and yes, they should, I'll just work part-time, but they're not meaning part-time and be a consultant. They're meaning part-time and I get to still keep everything, but we'll just change the org structure a little bit. So it's a really deep question. Randy, ask a lot of good questions about what that really means and what does their life look like when those other emerging leaders are really genuinely in control and they're not.
Well, you go ahead, Steve.
I thought you touched on a really important thing, Randy. So going back in my experience, I found doctors to not retire very well because they're so used to getting the accolades every 15 minutes. You saved my life, you cured my disease. For them to walk away from that, that's difficult. I've seen the same thing happen with CEOs. If they haven't prepared themselves, as Lidia is implying, for what's next in their life, it is hard to give up the control.
Yeah, because we need to feel like, if we're used to being a contributor, somebody that makes a difference, somebody that adds value in whatever ways to people's lives, where are we going to get that if we don't have a venue? And it doesn't have to be work, it can be all kinds of other places. But wow, what is going to create meaning in that former CEO or doctor's life once they're not in the office anymore? And if there's not anything, chances are they're not going to live very long, because their lives won't be very meaningful, and it'll be tough to stay on the planet and want to go through and slog through the day to day.
Lidia, I had the chance to hear was a tenured professor of organizational behavior at Harvard who left, which that may be a pretty small group of people that leave that job, but started an institute that focused on rebuilding organizational behavior and psychology through genetics, anthropology. And so he hired all these biologists, geneticists, anthropologists to try and discover some of these things. And exactly what you're talking about, they spent a lot of time researching, and they stole a South American principle called saga, which is the idea of reason for being, and found that people that were in those positions, Steve, as you were discussing, people that had high touch points of purpose would die extremely quickly, like with not, within those, and then people that years. So I think the average, they said it was terrifying. It was like 3 years post-retirement. And, I said that to my dad, who retired, and he was like, oh, that can't be right. And then he started thinking about the people at his firm, and he was like, oh yeah, well, so-and-so died 3 months after he retired, 6 months after he retired. Hell, he was dead in 9 months. And was like, wow. And so I was like, crap, I got to give him a purpose. So I told him that I wasn't going to take any of my kids to any sports. And I was like, they're not going to play any sports unless you do it. Well, you can't do that. I'm like, I'm too busy. You got to do it. So it became his job. And now it's like his job. And I probably am extending his life.
Yeah.
He was a lawyer, right? So similar thing. You get all these ego bumps and that purpose. And it's important for everybody. So I always tell everybody I can, give your parents something to do. Give them not a hobby, make them reliant on it, because it will extend their life.
it's really, really true. What gives your life meaning? And the discovery of that is crucial for everyone. But I would agree that I think we do a horrible job of retirement and preparing people for what's next in this country. And, unlike European families or Grant's family, where, people really are very much interconnected and involved. Wow, if there's not something amazing, and what's more amazing than grandkids, right? How fun is that? People have got to have real and phenomenally rich something to look forward to. What's next? It's got to be genuinely meaningful, or it does not create a meaningful and fabulous life, which is what everybody really wants, but they may not know how to go about it.
See, what's interesting, Lydia, is like what we deal with my nonprofit. You'll see depression, you'll see a variety of things in our veterans, firefighters, police. So like what Grant's saying in terms of keeping people occupied, valued, I'd say it even transcends that and goes almost more into like identity, in terms of your identity being tied up in your profession. And I'm not going to overgeneralize, but I would say, yes, doctors, lawyers, military professionals, whomever, when it honest and truly is a profession that you've invested your life in, and now that's taken away from you, or you've forfeited it or given it up, I think that has far more deleterious effects on somebody's psyche than a lot of people let on.
Very, very, very true. Yes. How do you define yourself? And if you define yourself by your profession, where there's nothing wrong with that, and if you're proud of your profession, which is wonderful, but when you are no longer performing that profession, then who are you? And how do you create some bridges to move to what's next? Or, how do people use what they did learn or who they were in those professions to teach or train others? Right. When I think about the immense gifts that first responders of all kinds have, what can they do to pass those on or teach others that won't go through their rigorous program? But those are really meaningful and powerful skills and gifts that could really help. Like, think about, high school students, and think about, the culture as it is now. We don't create all of these kind of cross references for different generations and different places in life where people can learn from one another.
Well, awesome conversation, Lydia. This was great.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. It's so nice to see some of you that I've met, and I'd love to become acquainted with your group, Randy. Thank you so much for asking me. Yeah,
it was great insights, and I know you gave something here that everybody can apply somewhere in their life. So a lot of good work.
And one last comment: if you're the leader, what are the risks? What risks are you taking that are healthy risks that your people see you taking to create a more meaningful existence for yourself, both as a leader and as a human being? You are genuinely leading them, whether you're aware of it or not just in business, but how you show up in your life. So share with them so that they can also give themselves permission to do more of the same thing. And Steve, I'm going to take you up on that lunch.
Okay. All right. Well, great to see all of you. Have a great weekend, and we'll get together again next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.